Hi, it's Kirby Summers. Today is Friday, thank goodness. And I decided to do this podcast based on the comment I heard from Marsha Blackburn about subpoena, doing a subpoena on Jeffrey Epstein's estate to provide flight logs for his private plane, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get into this very specifically. I'm also going to be discussing one of the men that Jeffrey Epstein clearly, I'm gonna have to say alleged, blackmailed, and that is the now deceased governor for New Mexico, namely Bill Richardson, who, as you know, was said by Virginia Giuffre to have been among the men that she was instructed to please. I'm hoping this is not going to be a long podcast. I'm going to keep it here on YouTube. I'm going to thank all of you who have subscribed and liked my podcast. I'm going to ask you to please smash the like button because it gets word out, and more people get to see it based on the algorithm of YouTube. So I don't know how many of you heard that during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, I believe it was just yesterday, that would be November the 9th, Marsha Blackburn, who has basically been, in the government from a very young age, and I'll just briefly go into some of the things that she has supported, said the following, that she filed a subpoena to Jeffrey Epstein's estate to provide the flight logs for his private plane, given the numerous allegations of human trafficking and abuse surrounding Mr. Epstein. I think it's very important that we identify everybody that was on that plane and how many trips they took on that plane and the destinations to which they arrived. That was what she said. This is circulating on social media sites as if it's news. I get frustrated because did Bill Barr say something similar? And let me just say that I have issues with this statement based on several things. Number one, she is a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, and we know that Donald Trump is running to regain his seat as the President of the United States. Again, I'm going to refer to Virginia Giuffre, who said multiple times that the people that she was offered up to, and we're just talking about Virginia, we're not talking about the hundreds and possibly thousands of other girls and women, and frankly, males, who were offered up to the people who Epstein, and they're not all in his black book, by the way. I hope you've noticed that, hopefully with some of the information that I keep providing you. But she said very clearly that it crossed party lines. She said that very clearly. Other victims have said it too, but Virginia has been steadfast in a lot of her comments. And we also have other cases, historical cases, that show us that the trafficking of not just children, but of humans, just people who are sexually trafficked, such as in the Franklin child abuse cover-up, in the Presidio case, which really targeted very, very young children, in the Mark Dutroux case, and really just on and on and on. We have now many, many other, we're going to call these rings, that again, I'm going to emphasize form part of the same blackmail structure that has its roots not in the Mossad like some other indie media. And I'm going to use Professor Hamamoto's favorite word because I like some of the words that he comes up with. Pop-up pundits. Keep insisting. But frankly, you cannot have Mossad, let's call it Mossad blackmail, without the approval and, in most cases, the oversight of the CIA. And I cannot emphasize this any clearer. So that one of the things that Marsha Blackburn has been a supporter of, aside from Donald Trump, and I believe she made that comment and that statement. Well, I mean, like, again, let's just look at this very carefully. Epstein was arrested on July the 6th, 2019. We are now in the middle, almost, of November 2023. If she was so concerned about naming the, let's call them perpetrators, right? We have to call them perpetrators. And who wants to certainly out who flew on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. Where was she in July of 2019 when Epstein was first arrested? You know, we have to always question the narrative. We have to always question the motives of someone who makes certain statements in a very public manner. And again, someone who is politically minded. So while I did some research on what she has been a supporter of, one of these caught my interest. From a very young age, she was, well, a young age, meaning when she became involved in politics, she was really involved with zero population growth. Now zero population growth is something that began, it's a eugenics program. Again, it was sort of a CIA long arm, and basically a long arm is a group that presents to the public, and it's sort of guided by people who have some reach within their districts to sort of, you know, do the bidding of what the government wants. We know that eugenics has been a problem, and it's also something that Jeffrey Epstein believed in, right? If we go into, let's say, the history, and I wrote a book on it, Chasing Chandler, of the Chandler family, the people that she's descended from were some of the people who were the first ones to attend Bohemian Grove. At Bohemian Grove, all of the people, and this is going back to the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and I'm not talking about just Bohemian Grove, because that's just one of the places where this eugenics thing is part of. They would talk about it, and they would make, in fact, one of the early presidents of Stanford University was a very close friend of the family Chandler, who owned and ran the Los Angeles Times. And again, he was a proponent of eugenics. Eugenics, what it really means, and it's also, there are offshoots into the CIA's program MK Ultra, which is just like an umbrella word for, so far they've only identified maybe 140 to 170 programs, but that was back in the 70s, so you can only imagine how many programs they have now. But where they targeted, let's say in the case when Gary Webb got into diving into what the CIA was doing with importing drugs into poor communities in California, and you know about a highway Ricky Ross and his involvement. And we know that Gary Webb first got mainstream endorsement, and he appeared on mainstream media, exposing the CIA's connection to importing drugs. And then, of course, they turned their back on him, and he was found to have, quote, committed suicide with two bullets to the head. Yeah, sure. However, the targeting of minorities has always happened. You have to go back to the beginning. America was, quote, not discovered. There were people living here, and they were wiped out for the settlers who came in. So that this population, zero population growth, eugenics, is all part of keeping the upper classes, who primarily white, and if you study them long enough, they are descendants of early settlers in the United States. You will see that this is a CIA-controlled group. So from the very beginning, Marsha Blackburn was a proponent of this. The other thing I have a problem with is that this woman seems to think that Jeffrey Epstein only had one airplane. That's not true. Jeffrey Epstein had 3 planes and various other vehicles, and they were all used for the assault on the victims. I mean, even his cars, he had, among these cars, there were 2 Mercedes that were sort of like retrofitted as if it were driving the president of the United States. But even in these cars, the victims have claimed to have been molested. So and of course they were molested in his various homes. But for some reason, Marsha Blackburn seems to think that the, quote, abuse only happened on the island, and that, quote, the perpetrators could only have been identified by being on a flight log. Again, that's not true. Has she done no research at all? Clearly, that's the case, because the mainstream media narrative has been that Jeffrey Epstein committed these crimes on an island. Even they don't really delve into Epstein's various homes, which, as you know, were in New York, in Palm Beach, in New Mexico, in Paris, in various places. No one has really even talked about his properties in Colorado or his other homes in Florida. No one, not mainstream, and not, the pop-up pundits that, have a lot of followers on social media, but who only focus on various things and do not take in the whole picture, and do not talk about multiple political parties, and do not talk about multiple rings overlapping. So, yeah, I have an issue with what she said, because it gives people false hope that names are going to be revealed and that, quote, justice will be done. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. This is a political ploy. Please see things for what they really are. Let us stop. Really, we need to stop falling for a psyop. We have been exposed to too many psyops. It is just a political ploy, all right? Even Mark DeTroy, by the way, when he was finally arrested, he said that he was not a lone predator, but that he was part of a wider ring. Sometimes you have to listen to the people who are arrested and what they say, right? But he was treated as though he was the lone predator. We also have, before I move on to explaining the art of blackmail using an actual targeted person who was alleged by Virginia to have been told to please, because I went into some newly released CIA records and found some really interesting information that I'm going to share with you today. But again, Dutroux basically said he was part of a broader ring. Again, it was connected to drugs. And I'm going to say to you today that that snakes itself over into the CIA. I'm sorry that I get frustrated. I should really just not be surprised by a lot of the things that I see. But it's frustrating because I really feel offended, personally offended, that somebody like Marsha Blackburn, who is part of the mainstream establishment, and of course, her story will be news for the next 2 days, claiming that she is so morally right, when in fact she has ulterior motives, and she doesn't know anything apparently about the Epstein situation. It's clear to me she knows nothing about it except maybe one article she might have read in a mainstream, I mean, like, seriously. It offends me that they feel that we are so ignorant that we're not going to see behind the lies. We are far more advanced than that at this point in time. So I want to discuss Bill Richardson, who has passed away. However, you know that he was the former governor of New Mexico, and it was alleged by Virginia Jeffrey that he was one of the many men who she was sent to interact with in that manner. Well, the CIA kept a file on Bill Richardson, which frankly was a surprise to me when I found it. And they'd had a file on him from the very, very beginning, when he became part of the political machine. Now, he is considered by the CIA, by the documents that I have studied, to be Mexican. However, he has an American father. His mother is Mexican. He was raised in Mexico City. He became, initially he wanted to be a ball player. That didn't work out. He had an injury. The family moved finally to the United States. He moved to New Mexico and entered politics in 1978 when he became the executive director of the Democratic State Committee. Now, here's something that's most people don't know, and I always talk about the founding fathers and people who arrived in what we now know as the United States back in the 1600s. Well, Richardson was descendant of William Brewster, who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower. So, one of the reasons he was allowed to go up the ranks clearly is this reason, that he was a descendant of William Brewster. Okay. However, the CIA kept files on Richardson because, according to their records, he was aligned, based on his Mexican heritage via his mother's side, with Mexicans and Native Americans in New Mexico. And these are two groups that are considered minorities. Minorities are not really accepted by the elite, the people who really run this world. They're just not. That's why there's a eugenics program that makes sure that certain people are disposed of, or why, for example, women in Puerto Rico under a CIA assignment were made sterile. This also happened in the United States with children as young as 14. They were made sterile because they don't want certain people to reproduce. I mean, there's just so many examples I can use about how the government has worked on this in a very covert way. However, let me get back to Richardson. So the files that the CIA kept on Richardson watched what what he did with the population in New Mexico, which again was described by them as being, by them meaning the CIA, 3/5 of which is either Hispanic or American Indian. So they opposed his work on the House subcommittee in what is called the equal employment opportunity. The consistent thing that we have learned while we're studying covert operations and programs presented to us by the government is sometimes a program is named, let's call it equal opportunity employment, or equal employment opportunity is, I think, the correct term, is that what we're presented as the public is not really in reality how it's done. So it's done in a very select way. So the CIA decided that they would have Bill Richardson start interacting with the CIA, and they had him over to a CIA office, and they also went to New Mexico. This coincides with the time that Jeffrey Epstein was in his life. Okay, Epstein began this period of his life. Mainstream, I think, and indie reporters claim it was 1991, 1992 when he became involved with Ghislaine Maxwell. My references date it to 1980s, based on some of the inside information I've gotten from other victims who have not stepped forward, and my own research about Epstein's espionage activities during the 1980s and who helped him. And for those of you who want more information on that, I certainly have articles on my Substack. I'm not going to discuss that here about what Epstein was doing in the 1980s. All right, so you're welcome to go there. So they invited him, again, we're talking about Bill Richardson, to the CIA offices, and also went back to his place in New Mexico where, Jeffrey Epstein had the Zorro Ranch, to kind of like work with him to see, basically to let him know that, yeah, we're taking it seriously. Yeah, we're doing this or we're doing that. So the reason that Richardson was targeted, it is clear based on the information I've obtained, looking at some of the records the CIA kept on Bill Richardson, was to keep him in line. So it's clear to me that there exists blackmail material, although he's now dead, on Richardson to ensure that he did not promote the interests of either the Mexicans or the Native Americans, who were the majority in New Mexico. As you know, Donald Trump, hey, don't hate the messenger, hate the message. One of the first things he said when he was trying to run for the 2016 presidential election was, let's build a wall. Now, we can have arguments back and forth. I don't like to have political arguments because you can't win. And it's difficult for me to really make a lot of people understand that the two-party system is a psyop. So if you talk to victims the way that I have talked to victims, and if you have my background, you know, I was the slave to one of the billionaires who runs the world, who was also connected to CIA, to MI6, and to Mossad, all right? Literally, all three. And as I have stated on my podcast before, his family would either do Republican or Democrat because there was no difference. It's just you have a puppet sitting, and we're not just talking about, you know, I want to make it clear, we're not just talking about the United States. This crosses across continents. You know, we are given the idea that we have a choice, when in reality, the choice is made for us. And in closing, I'm going to give you one of those examples. Bill Clinton did not necessarily win the presidential election when he became president. No, it was given to him primarily because of his help with Ronald Reagan's presidency, who was really run by George H.W. Bush, and Clinton's involvement in the trafficking of, you know, we're going to go back to what Gary Webb discovered 2 decades later, the trafficking of drugs through the Mina airport. And he was given this position despite the fact that there were many things that would have disrupted his winning anything. Because at the time that Clinton ran, we were still under the, if you have a scandal of a personal nature, if you have had an affair outside of your marriage, and that became news, that was enough to sink any politician. In Clinton's case, we know of a lot of them. In fact, Donald Trump, during his run in 2016, decided to bring Paula Jones and some of the other adult victims of Bill Clinton to come in and sit in during his debate with Hillary Clinton. What he did not do is bring in some of the children that I have written about, again, on my Substack, that were involved with Clinton when he was in Arkansas. I mean, you know, so I don't like to get involved in a political, it's blue or it's red. To be frank, it's the same color. It's almost like when you walk into an ice cream shop and you are, you know, the guy behind the counter says, do you want 1 scoop or 2? That too is sort of a psychological thing that it was explained to me by my abuser, because he owned an ice cream thing, and he explained to me the psychology behind that question that they ask you every time you go into an ice cream store. Do you want 1 or 2 scoops? And so you select probably the first one because you think that you are making a decision. No, the decision has been made for you. You already walked into the ice cream store. You're going to buy some ice cream. So that question is posed to you, but it's a psyop. It's a psychological, it's part of the training that, let's say somebody like Anton LaVey went through, someone with psychological training. It's part of why they have magicians. It's sort of like just to make you think that you have a say in what happens, but it's predestined, okay? In any event, I wanted to bring this to you today, and I don't want to bum you out. I just want you to like always question the narrative, all right? Don't just take what you see at face value, do some research, find out on your own. Don't fall for a psyop. And, let's just keep doing this, keep going forward. I thank you again for your ongoing support, for the kind words that you leave for me. And, again, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Talk soon. Bye.